Hello, everyone, and welcome to our live book club with author Q&A. We are joined today by Zoe Tavares Bennett to talk about her book, The Song of Gaia. So welcome, Zoe. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to do a short little slideshow intro about what Save Ancient Studies is, and then we're going to get straight into the questions. And please bear with me. The technology on my end is working super slow today, so please be patient. Okay, so SASA is a nonprofit organization that works to promote the study of the ancient world and engagement with our human deeper pasts, building a grassroots movement through outreach, collaboration, accessibility, and public scholarship. We work toward our goal of inspiring inclusive community, a wide inclusive community of scholars, learners, and students. We are on just about every social media platform. So if you love ancient studies and you like the work that we do here and you are enjoying our live events, please give us a follow. We always have new events and new things popping up related to ancient studies. So please give us a follow. So just a book club protocol. We are live streaming on several platforms. So please be kind and respectful when you ask questions, and please feel free to ask as many questions as you would like throughout the sessions. I can see your questions, and if I see anything pop up, we can ask the author about the book. Again, please be patient with the technology and those administering it. It's super slow for me today. And then if you miss anything or you miss part of the stream or you have to jump off early or anything like that, our video is posted after the meeting on our YouTube channel at Save Ancient Studies Alliance. So please feel free to watch it later as well. And then you can become a recurring donor. SASA is run entirely on volunteers. And so every little bit that anybody can contribute really helps us further our mission and keep creating content to save ancient studies. So if you would like to become a recurring donor, we would very much appreciate it. And you absolutely can. There is a QR code in the top corner here that says support SASA that goes directly to our membership page. So please feel free to check that out. And I believe that is the last slide. Yep, that is it. So let me get this out of the way and then we can jump straight into our book club discussion. Alrighty, and I am going to put the QR code for the Song of Gaia up on the screen. Here it is right there. And so this goes directly to our bookshop.org account, where if you purchase the book through this link, SASA gets a little bit of the proceeds. So I'm just going to keep this up throughout the whole stream, and let's jump into it. Okay, Zoe, so glad to have you back. The last time you were here, we talked about your other book, The Son of God, which was based off of the life of Caesar Augustus, which I absolutely loved. This one is quite a bit different. So in your own words, can you describe what this book is about?
Yeah. So The Song of Gaia is a fantasy novel about a young woman named Alex who has a seemingly perfect life, everything going for her. Traditionally speaking, she's in college, at a good school. She has a boyfriend, long-term boyfriend. And it seems like she has her life kind of set on a path that is successful for a modern woman. And this all gets turned upside down when she discovers clues as to her mother's disappearance that happened 10 years prior. And she kind of just assumed that her mother had, left their family. And this completely unravels her life, and she goes in search of her mother's fate. And this leads her to stumble upon a doorway into a magical city, a magical world. And there she learns about a prophecy that foresees the end of Zeus, the king of the gods, his reign, and a myth, a forgotten myth about an emerald stone that will have the power to restore Gaia as Mother Earth, queen of the gods and mortals. So it kind of drops her into this whole other fantasy world, this a magical realm.
Awesome. Okay. So, what inspired you to write this story?
There were multiple elements that inspired, I think, kind of two worlds in my own life came together to write this novel, which I think is very fitting. On the one hand, when I came up with the first little idea of it, I was around like 19, I think I was turning 20. And it occurred to me that it was the last like teenage year, technically. But it felt so unimportant, like, oh, you're just like, this is not a big change. But it did spark a lot of thinking on my end of, what my life was going to look like in the next decade, and potentially a lot of important decisions and just monumental changes. And I started wondering like what it means to be a woman and all these questions that I think a lot of young women have as they start contemplating things like, marriage, your career, your life, what it's going to look like. And then on the other hand, I was studying classics. I was reading a lot of mythology. I was fascinated by the stories of women in that time. It felt so different to my life in our like modern world. And yet at the same time, I felt connections to their stories. And of course, Helen of Troy, which is a huge inspiration for this story. She leaves her husband and her only daughter, essentially, which is was a strange thing, even like for their time, obviously. And I was also researching about the city of Alexandria, which I've always been fascinated about, as like a multicultural intellectual hub in the ancient world, with its library, and it's where different cultures mingle in a really unique way. And I think it was a good representation of how the ancient Mediterranean was and how I wanted to understand it. And so those things kind of fused together to create a story where I could explore a kind of a mythicized version of the city of Alexandria, as well as all these like Homeric myths, and told through the story of a young woman trying to like understand who she was.
Yeah. Okay. That's quite a bit. So that kind of jumps into my next question, because you not only talk about Greek mythology in here, but you also have a little bit of Egyptian mythology mixed in, and some other things. So what made you decide to write a story with both of these mythologies kind of mingling as they did, and instead of just one of them? Like, what was the inspiration there?
I mean, definitely the city of Alexandria was a huge inspiration for that. I think I actually received a review one time that was like, oh, like, the Book of the Dead, that's Egyptian, that's not Greek. And I was like, I know, like, like I did that on purpose because the city of Alexandria was a Greek founded city in Egypt. And so they had access to like Egyptian knowledge, the Egyptian priests and the archives that they had. They also like studied the Greek philosophers. Romans were in the course of history heavily involved too, both adding and destroying to the city of Alexandria. And then you have the Near East, and you have Mesopotamia, and just ancient knowledge, wisdom, sciences that definitely the scholars in Alexandria were aware of and were educated on those things. So religion too was a lot more flexible and fused than we kind of imagine today. We might think, oh, well, the Greeks were Greeks, the Egyptians were Egyptians. They didn't have any mixing at all, but actually they were quite flexible in the fact, like they could say, oh, well, I have this God and they have this God, and that's our God, just with a different name. And they kind of could make connections. So they were in dialogue in a real way. And so when I created this city that exists in a magical, like, in between God, like the mortal world and the divine world, I was also, imagining that all stories, all mythologies are essentially doing that. And so I felt like if they didn't have a problem mixing things and taking myths and interpreting stories and all that stuff quite freely how they wanted to, then I felt like I could do the same.
I love that. I love how you captured that essence in the story. Because as I was reading it, I was like, oh, this is Hades. But then it was like Osiris. And I was like, that, like, it kind of threw me a little bit. And then I started thinking about it. And yeah, like it was a blend of the two. And there's so many similarities in the pantheons that it does make sense for them to have had more, I guess, tolerance and more acceptance and open-mindedness about other cultures and the similarities between the gods. So I love that you captured that in the story. And it woven so well too. I was just felt very immersed in the story as they were going through it and finding all these clues and all these things. It was like little Easter eggs. And of course, I'm a Greek history nerd and just an ancient history nerd in general. So I was geeking out the whole time. So I loved it. Okay, so that goes into my next question. So the detail just in the ancient Greek text alone, which you have a lot of, and I'm actually studying the ancient Greek, like an intro refresher class at the moment. So like when you had the ancient Greek words and stuff in there, I was like trying to like sound it out and like say it. So that was really cool. But I was also thinking about like how much research had to have gone into all of that, and getting like all of that correct and everything. And then you also have like the descriptions of the library and the streets and the academy and just like the different culture and like festivals and things. Like you really painted an amazing descriptive world. So like, how did you approach your research to this? And did you have a solid idea for the plot from the get-go? Or did some of it evolve as you researched?
I would say like it felt like 90% of it evolved with research, which I think there's always some flexibility. Even I'm a huge planner when it comes to my novels, but there's always the like felicitous like happenings that occur when you're writing and you're dropping something and weave this now into the story. So that always happens, but there was so much research on different fronts because, and I guess it's like a metaphor for the novel and what's happening, but there is like the mundane story, literally the human element that is, that could happen in a normal novel. It's not fantasy at all. And so I had to have that, structured first. I had to know what I wanted the characters to go through on their mundane level, like their day to day, what was going to happen with their relationships, what was happening with Alex's mother, what was her backstory. All that needed to be set in place. And then the city, there was the physical city that had to be constructed and world built, as any fantasy novel. And that was heavily inspired by books I was reading about the city of Alexandria. Like I saw a map once. When I saw the map of the city of Alexandria in a book, I was like, this needs to be a fantasy novel. Like this, I have to incorporate this somehow. So I pulled a lot of real elements. Like one of the streets is called Mesonpedion. And I literally take that, and that's one of the street names. So a lot of elements that are in the actual ancient city of Alexandria that I researched, I incorporate. And then there is a lot of Greek dialogue. They speak ancient Greek or a form of it in, I guess, my form of it, in the city. They also encounter a forgotten myth in ancient Greek, which I composed. I studied classics, so I studied Greek and Latin, and so I wanted it to feel really like they were discovering something new that was dug up somewhere. Like, how'd they find this? I made it, but to keep that element of it's something that no one has ever seen before. It's crazy that they found this forgotten myth, but that was tough to do because to make it in a dactylic hexameter, which is how Homer composed his poems, his epic. That was difficult. Thankfully, I have also classics friends, I call them my classics consultants, who will check if I, put the accent wrong, or if I missed something in the meter. So shout out to her, my friend, who looked at that. But yeah, I think there was a lot of mythological research too, but I guess I did a lot of that in school. So it felt like I had a well of stories, mythology that I knew about, culture that I knew about. I think something that was interesting that really evolved the more I wrote about the city was the fact that I wanted it to feel a little bit like stepping into the Bronze Age, which is the era that Homer was writing about or singing about. And so I had to really research, what would they wear? What jewelry, what clothes? I did want to bring to life some of that, the colorful aspects of, life in general and in the ancient world too. And I wanted to, if they used oil lamps and not, they didn't have electricity, things that, like when you're building any, it happens in historical fiction too. You have to think what would they have really done? So I found myself also trying to bring as much real world elements into the fantasy world.
Yeah, I think you did a great job. And there's one scene that stands out in particular where they're going to the bath and they have to stand in line. And that was so funny to me because I don't think that has ever occurred to me that there might be a line to get into the bathroom in ancient Greece to take a bath. But when they did that, I was just like, there probably were a lot of people trying to get into these baths. And a line made sense, but it was just, I loved reading that part because it was like, oh, this is like a timeless thing. Standing in lines is a timeless thing. And it was great. But I also really liked how you described the different kinds of baths and the normal one and then the hot steamy bath and the oils and things that they used and just the whole process. I really liked it a lot, but I also like that little standing in line part was funny and kind of, I don't know, it gave me a different perspective on, I guess, ancient things. Because when I've ever thought about public spaces like that, I never think about lines. I just think about people just kind of, la-di-da going about their day. So that added, I guess, a more human, mundane element to the romanticized version that's in my head. I don't know. I'm rambling now, but detail, that was really fun.
Yeah, I think something.
What assumptions did you have?
Came in. Okay, sorry. I just want to say, I think something that was fun about writing this was that when I was, these people it's a portal fantasy. So it's not happening in another world. It feels like that, but they can access our world. They're coming from our world. So I think when they first stumble upon the city and they're kind of I'm writing book 3 right now. It's a culture shock for them in some ways. So I get to play around with the fact that I also am experiencing the city through them for the first time. And so I can kind of lean into probably the culture shocks I would imagine I would have if I stepped into this kind of world or stepped into a kind of that mythical Homeric past. Which was really fun. And I think as a woman too, we have so many questions what were they wearing? They definitely had they had cool clothes, like colorful clothes. They did their hair up. They even had wigs. They had makeup. They had all the stuff that we have. And I always wonder, like, what would it be like these daily routines that we have, bathing, dressing up, all those things, like where do you go if you want, to get food or water, all of that you don't really think about, but it was so fun for me to explore it through my characters.
Yeah, you brought up another point about the clothing and like the colorful clothing and everything, which is something that I can't remember what I was reading, but they were talking about the statues and how the statues that we have now were actually painted all these different colors, and they would have been very different from what they are now because they were painted and had a bunch of different colors. But it's like, it seems like the generic, when you think of someone in ancient Greece, it's like, oh, they're wearing like white robes or something, and like that's not at all how it was. Like they had access to dyes and different kinds of fabrics and stuff like that. And so that was an awesome detail that you added to, and like the veils and stuff. And it was, yeah, that was a really cool detail. Okay, what assumptions did you have going into the research that were challenged by what you ended up finding?
I don't know if I would say this is not so much. I mean, this is an assumption I think we all have, and I even though I'm trying to unassume it, I still have it when I'm researching, and I think that it relates to the fact that the ancient Mediterranean world was way more mixed. Like there was a lot more movement happening. There was a lot of trade happening. So people knew, like people were going from, the Near East to as far as Portugal, like quite early on. So there was a lot of like, people forget, like, the ships they were sailing on the coast, they had to stick to the coast. So they were like, stopping, and everyone was, mingling, and it wasn't just goods that were traded, it was also ideas. And so when I was like stepping into this world and having, there's like hints that there are other people in this realm. But I think what was important for me was to allow for that kind of fluidity in thought too, not just incorporating like Greek myth, but trying to incorporate even like cults and other philosophies that were happening, especially in Alexandria, but all over the Mediterranean. So I even am inspired, especially later on in the series, but it starts to, come into play now in this book, like Abrahamic philosophy, religion, the Near East, Mesopotamia. There's like Akkadian and Sumerian myths that get incorporated into my final novel. And so I think just like trying to tap into that kind of rich tapestry that was happening, and trying to leave as many of my modern assumptions behind. And I think that goes into play with like, what were they using when they bathed? Like, how was it? Because if you don't check those assumptions, you will miss the tiny details of how they probably had to live in this kind of world that, I'm bringing to life.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And so I was going to ask if it was going to be a trilogy, because I know you already have book 2 out. So I'm excited that there's a book 3. That's awesome.
Pillars of the Sea.
Yeah, I love it. I already ordered my book 2, by the way. I'm so excited to read it. Okay, what was your favorite thing that you found during your research?
I think something that I stumbled upon that became kind of the crux of the whole series, which I wasn't really expecting when I first started with my idea about this girl that's like, becoming an adult or trying to be. I didn't really get into all of the mythology and philosophy until as I was really shaping the story. So there's like a Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, that's found on the Emerald Tablet, which also has its own complicated history. and future, like from that point. There's a lot of interpretations that were made of it. But I think what I loved about this series was it starts off, it's a portal fantasy, so you start off in our world. But as you get through this novel, and then as you get through the whole series, all of these, like, it becomes more and more mythic and philosophical. And I really tap into, challenging, like bringing up these mythologies, bringing up these philosophies that were circled around the Mediterranean at that time, but also challenging them and putting my own like female spin on it, because a lot of these philosophies that I was researching, and even religions, like they were created and like, especially the scholars of Alexandria, they were all mostly men. There were actually female scholars, but they were mostly men. Most of the Greek philosophers were men, and so a lot of these stories are told from a male perspective. And so I think it was fun for me to interpret them and be like, well, like through my modern female eyes, like this is kind of how I'm interpreting those things. And I think through Alex, whose full name is Alexandria, not coincidentally, her eyes kind of, especially since she doesn't study classics, she doesn't know anything about this world, she gets to kind of interpret it her own way and reshape the mythology too. So I think that was that was the most exciting thing about this novel. It kind of set up that trajectory, because I didn't really know 100% how the rest of the series was going to turn out.
That's cool. I like that. That's awesome. And yeah, her journey definitely does feel like very parallel with a lot of Greek myths. And I really liked that because it kind of set expectations in my head as to like what her path would be. And that was fun to like read through and explore. And then my own expectations from that be challenged throughout. And it made it really, really fun. So I really like that. Can you talk a little bit? Well, you've already talked a little bit about the city, but what were you most excited? Excuse me. What were you most excited to capture about the ancient world through your portrayal of this fantastical city?
I mean, I've spoken a little bit about, the historical aspects that I wanted to bring to life, especially from the Bronze Age. So I think, like clothing, oil lamps, like they were bathing, the bronze swords, like all that. And also some of the mythology. I wanted that to feel real. Like these people believed in that. And I think I wanted to show that, it feels like another world. I think it feels like fantasy. Like the Homeric world that I was studying, it has gods and demigods and monsters, but I wanted to ultimately show that we are a part of that world too. Like that is our world, and we inherit that magic. But then also that we, like, that is a part of our world, and we're also a part of that bigger world. Like there's a cosmic story that's happening. And yeah, I think I just wanted to expose people to the complexities of the ancient Mediterranean world. I think that's something like that's maybe the biggest takeaway from my time as an undergrad, studying, and then also my travels afterwards. I did a huge trip, kind of visiting a bunch of sites along the Mediterranean that were, ancient Roman, ancient Greek, and more than that. But the biggest takeaway from that trip, and I think I incorporated that heavily into my novel, is when you're going to these sites and you're physically present, and you're like, okay, I'm in the throne room, I'm in a bedroom, I'm in here. It's like imagining what life really would have been like for them, So trying to physically and like from day to day, those daily routines, trying to imagine all that and bring it to life. And ultimately, like, studying only gets you so far. I think like to really understand sometimes story is the only means of understanding someone else's life. And I think the ancients knew that. That's why they told so many stories. That's why we still read the Iliad and the Odyssey today. So, yeah. I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's cool. So, okay, I'm gonna veer off just a little bit because now you've piqued my curiosity about your travels. What is your favorite place that you have traveled to, and what was your favorite little detail that you saw there? And can you talk about that just a little bit?
Ooh, I did a huge trip. So I visited sites in Portugal, Spain, Italy, and Greece. And it's hard to pick a favorite place because I mean, some of them were like, this is so hard because on the one hand, when you like, there's a part of me that, I love especially the Roman sites because they're newer relatively, still 2,000 years old,
Uh-huh.
but they're relatively newer compared to the Greek sites. So I loved being able to really picture like how their houses looked. I think that was really fun for me. Like you go to Pompeii and you're like, oh, that's essentially their wallpaper. That's their furniture. This is how they set up their houses. And you can really get into um, that daily experience a little bit more easily. But then you have the Greek world. And when you go to Greece and you go to these holy sites, like Delphi, and you go to Sunio, and where they put temples, you quickly realize why they put a temple there. You go up to the top and you look out at the view, and there is something divine about it. You get it. And so some of those places were just the most beautiful places I've ever been. And I think I tried to tap into both sides of the ancient world. There's the mythic, like, prophecy. You're at the top of the temple and gods can come speak to you when you're hallucinating. And then there's the other side, which is, they're probably lining up to go into that bath, so.
Yeah. I love that. That is really cool. I have not been to Italy, but I would love to go. I went to Greece. Oh my gosh, 10 years ago now. That hurts to say, but 10 years ago, and yeah, it was like that. Like you go to this place and you're just like, man, like this feels so awesome, and you're just looking out, and yeah, it was an amazing experience. So that's really cool. Um, so this is book one of a trilogy. Can you share what new myths might be in the sequel and then maybe even the third one without being too spoilery?
So essentially the Song of Gaia is in the city. And then, I created this realm. It's an in-between realm. I think the logical next step was to explore, well, what else is going on out there past the harbor, past the inner sea that you can look out at from the coast. So then, and it makes sense with the storyline and how it ends. And I won't say anything about that, but there's a reason for the characters, some of them, to traverse the wine dark sea, if you will, and explore the rest of the realm. And so the first book, you have Alex and her mother Elena, and I think that closely in some ways follows I would say, aftermath, I guess, well, it is inspired by Helen of Troy and her leaving her husband and only daughter. And that gets incorporated through Alex's mother's story and her background, but through Alex's eyes as the daughter. And this second book, The Pillars of the Sea, is more inspired by Odysseus's wanderings in the Odyssey. And the main character that we follow in this one, her name, coincidentally or maybe not coincidentally, is named Penelope. And she goes on this journey where you may or may not come across one-eyed monsters and creatures of the sea and people who have, huge kingdoms and with gates made of silver and gold. If you know those references, then you'll know who I'm talking about. But they travel to mythic worlds. I'll say a hint would be like the myth of Persephone and Demeter. I think we saw Demeter already in the first novel, but we kind of followed Persephone this time a little bit. And yeah, so there's a lot of these scenes will feel so familiar, but at the same time, there's a reinterpretation of them, which was so fun for me because I love the Odyssey. So if you like the Odyssey, you'll like this book. Oh, and then the third
I can't
novel is an inward retreat. It goes back to the city, but you get to learn more about this sisterhood of sages, or these wise women. And it's a little bit of a play on the seven sages who were men, but these are women, and they have a sisterhood. And you learn more about them in the city, and there's elements of prophecy. So I really explore this idea of knowing the future and the past. And then what really is the relationship between, and I say relationship like wink, relationship between mortality and immortality. So I think the role of the divine and as well as the role of mortals comes into play in a big way. So the third one gets quite philosophical, but it's still super fun. There's a lot of action. So.
Ooh, I'm excited. I can't wait. So and this is just me being curious as a fellow writer, how far into book 3 are you? And when do you hope that one will be released?
So I have a first draft done. I recently started grad school and I was like, I need to get one draft done. I needed it to be on paper, written, so I'm not like, in the weeds of a novel as I'm starting. So I have the first draft done and I'm almost done with the first round of edits. And then I want to send it to a friend or two to read. And then there will be more rounds of edits after that. So I'm kind of like in the second draft of it, kind of. But I really know what's happening in the novel. Like it's pretty much set in stone. So, which is so fun. I love when it's like, ooh, I have the story now. I can like talk about it a little bit.
Yes, that's exciting because I will probably get book 2 in a couple weeks, and then I anticipate devouring it. So I'm glad that I won't have to wait super, super long for book 3.
It'll be sometime. I'm hoping like spring would be like hopeful. I would hope for spring.
Okay. All right. Ooh, that's even sooner than I thought. Cool. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about Alex because I really loved her journey. I loved how she starts, and kind of throughout. Just me personally, I found a lot of her story to be very relatable, a lot of her conflict to be very relatable. Like she begins with like, she's going to Harvard and she has this, wonderful professional career pretty much laid out for her, this dream of success, like the, husband and kids and white picket fence and, being this, prestigious professional woman. And then, she kind of puts a pin in all of that to go explore this other thing kind of on a whim, sort of. And I really loved that. And so she's going here, and like all of those things that she had going for her are really kind of challenged because she finds herself in these situations spontaneously that she wasn't anticipating. And so I kind of already talked a little bit about how the parallels between her and the myth kind of set some of my expectations that ended up being challenged by the end, without being too spoilery. But I really, really liked her journey and her conflicts and where she ended up was also very unexpected to me, as both someone who reads a lot of fantasy books. I really liked it, and I'm wondering um, what made you write your main character this way, and like what was your goal, I guess, for her to your reader? Like, what did you want the reader maybe to understand about their place in society, maybe? And this is getting a little deeper than what I expected it, but this is what's coming out. So, so like, what were you hoping the reader to take away from this character of Alex? And will we see her again in future books?
Okay, so I think I always have the reader in mind, but I think when you write a novel, sometimes it's a little bit selfish. You know, I'm like, well, I have control of this. I'm going to write what I would love to see in a novel. So I think a part of me wanted a different kind of female perspective because, like, I've also read a lot of fantasy, and usually, I love those stories, but I kind of wanted something different that I felt like I really could relate to. And I felt like if I could relate to it, I'm sure there's other women out there and people out there who could relate to it as well. And I think one of those things was not starting out like single with this idea of finding a man at the end of it. I love romance, but I kind of wanted to start her in a relationship already. Like she already has that figured out. She's been dating this guy for like 4 years, and she's probably going to marry him after college at some point, and they kind of already have these assumptions about their lives. And she does love him. Like that's what she, that's how she sees the world. And then when she has to confront her mother's past and the potential, like she assumes that she left, but then once she thinks, oh well, maybe she didn't leave, like she has this clue that, oh, maybe she was forced to leave for some reason. And then it was like, well, why would she leave her, like why would she leave her only daughter, her husband? There's a little bit of a potential that maybe she was in love with someone else before she got married. So there was like all these doubts, like, and I think that's what happens when we grow up too, especially with our parents. Like you start to realize that their lives weren't just this perfect or, just like this steady linear thing. Like they also have doubts. They're also people. So I think through confronting her mother and her life, I think she had to question things in herself. And then I think, but I still love romance. And I think this is kind of what I'm getting at is, as living in this modern world where a lot of women are choosing not to have kids, not to get married, they're maybe focusing more on their career or not. There's a lot of talk nowadays about like what the role of a woman is. And I think I was just having a lot of fun, actually. I love writing. So I was having a lot of fun, like exploring, for me and maybe for other people, like what does that mean when you don't really know, like you don't know what you want, you have, it seems like there's different paths that you can take and they're irreversible, so you kind of have to like really search within yourself. But I wanted to like give a lot of room for her to explore and for me to explore what it might mean. So there's a lot of questions. I think there's more questions asked than answered, but I think that's kind of the point. And that it's like, it's okay to fall in love. It's okay to choose yourself. It's okay when those things align or don't align. Like, that's life. And I think as a woman, you have to like confront those things maybe earlier even than men. So it felt like, yeah, I wanted to explore those things in that novel. And then to answer your question about whether she comes back, so the second novel, she will not be there because they are far away. Well, you really get her back in the third novel. So she does come back. I won't explain the circumstances under which she comes back because I think that is important to the story as a whole. But you do get a little bit of a break for like each novel. So the first one is purely Alexandra's perspective. It's all third person, but it's her point of view throughout the whole thing, and I think that was important. It was really about her story, and in a way, you have Elena's like perspective through her diary and through, you know, so it's almost like a dual perspective, but through Alexandria's eyes. And then the second book, you follow mainly another female character that Alex becomes friends with in the first novel, Penelope, and her journey. And I think that's another place where I was like, well, what if you really do want to find love, like that romantic, epic story? Like, how would that turn out? And I think I explore that, and the Odyssey, Odysseus and Penelope is like a perfect myth for love. So that, and then there's sprinkled in some perspectives of Zeb, who's another character. And then the third book, you follow almost equally two characters, Ari, who is another person that Alex meets, and also Chloe, who is Alex's friend from Harvard. So I think something that was super fun writing this book, which I also don't see a lot maybe, is I wanted her old friends that she kind of leaves behind to get involved in the story. People who like you wouldn't expect in a fantasy novel. They're there too because they're her friends, and then she makes more friends. I think that was important, like having, especially between the female friends, like between the women that she meets, they become friends. And so I think you start to root for them, hopefully, by the end of the novel. And so I think that helps for the next two novels. Like you get to really follow their journeys as well. So everything, I like to end things with a bow. Like, not in the middle of the series, but by the end, things are explained. And I also thought about doing maybe at some point, writing a novella for Alex's mother and her story. Because I have a full outline of what happens to her, and I don't include all of it because it's not all relevant. But she had an interesting, it did open a can of worms, I will say, like this whole trilogy. So I'm thinking about it.
That would be awesome. But I'm trying to think, like, just from everything that you did in book one, I'm trying to think would you even be able to tell her story in a novella? You might even just have to like make it just a full novel, like a prequel.
Well, knowing me and how much I write, it's not going to be a short novel. I would have to rein in like a lot, but so you're right. It probably would be a prequel.
But like, there's so much content and so many like curious things and so many moments in the Song of Gaia that made me think about her mom and like her relationship with Alexandros. And so I was like, that would be a pretty awesome story to develop more of. So I say go for it. But, I would say that. I'm also a writer, so.
It's probably going to happen. I'm just worried about like even going too far and then pulling these other characters who I created and now I like them. And they have there's such fascinating backstory that cropped up, especially in the second novel. It's actually it was so fun for me as a reader of Greek myth. I think you'll enjoy all of the allusions that I make to the Odyssey and like real characters from those, epic poems, and then incorporating them into the history of this world. And then I'm like, well, should I write? Like, it would be kind of cool to know their story too. So it's like a dangerous line.
It is a dangerous line. But like, I feel like books nowadays and like series nowadays, sometimes they don't really explore the whole world. It's like there's 2 or 3 books and then the author moves on to like something completely different. And like when we were growing up, at least, some of the books that I read, there could be like 15, 20 books in a series going through all the characters and exploring the world. And I feel like there's something, I feel like that was like kind of a normal thing that I don't see a lot of anymore. And it kind of makes me sad. So if you were to do that, that would be like nostalgic in so many ways.
I guess that's how I was raised too. Like you have, because for me, I had Cassandra Clare. That was maybe like a formative novel that I read. I remember reading it like probably at 12 years old, and the main character is like turning 14, and I remember rereading it a couple more times because I loved it so much. And she like I get to a time where I'm like, oh, she was 14. And like that's when I think I had to stop rereading them. But like she really like opens the world. You go back in time, you go like you see a lot of that world. And I think it is fun to go and it feels a little bit like you're writing fan fiction about your own novels.
Yeah, kind of. But like Greek myth is kind of that way too, because you have like the main stories, you have the Iliad and the Odyssey, but then you have all these other myths about the gods and titans and battles and wars and like all these intermingling things. And it feels like the inspiration for really fully developing a whole world and a cast of characters and their own backstories and all of that, like that in itself is very Greek myth inspired. Just from all the different stories that there are out there. So yeah.
I mean, if you think about like
awesome. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just thinking like, Helen of Troy, how many tragedies, how many stories, how many like philosophical treatises, how many everything from how much has been written about her, how many PhD dissertations have been written about her since that story was told. People have been grappling with her. Like there was tragedies claiming she didn't ever leave her husband and daughter. That was how like monumental that story was. Like who was this figure? Why'd she do this? So I think I was just one more person who was basically like shaping my own version of the myth and telling my own story of it.
Yeah, it's funny because the last book club that I hosted with SASA, I read The Death and Life of Iphigenia by J. Suzanne Wilson. And she mentions Helen of Troy as well. And some of the earlier backstory with her. And like before the Trojan War even happens, Helen has a whole life of different things that happened to her. And it's like, whoa, that's wild. So yeah, there's definitely a lot for really fleshing out all your characters and building on the world. So, but yeah, anyway, thank you so much for joining us. This has been amazing. For everybody out there watching and listening, I'm going to put up Zoe's website. She has all of her books there, and you can, she has a blog and some other things. So check out her website. Where is it? There it is right there. There's the QR code. Check out her website, sign up for a newsletter, read her book because it is really awesome. I devoured it in like 5 days. It was so good. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me again.
When I read the second book, I'm going to invite you back because I can't wait to talk about it already. I haven't read it yet, but I can't wait to talk about it already. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Bye.